Welcome to Potter Watch, episode 11. Very exciting episode. We're here with Georgette Mulheir, the CEO of Lumos, and on Potter Watch, all of our listeners are eagerly waiting to hear about Lumos. There's an exciting event tonight, a fundraiser following the
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them
release. Loads of people are here in New York City waiting to see the film and also support Lumos.
This is Potter Watch, a podcast where we get the word out and give voice to the magic that illuminates the human spirit. Join us for episode 11, where we highlight the work of Georgette Mulheir and her colleagues at Lumos. Lumos is an international non-for-profit organization that seeks to end the institutionalization of children in several countries by 2050. Lumos was founded in 2004 by J.K. Rowling after she read an article about children placed in caged beds under institutional care. Georgette has published 4 books on children's rights and named in the U.S. as one of the world's most influential social workers in 2014. She was successful in Moldova, where there has been a 70% reduction in the number of institutionalized kids over 6 years. So let's extend our ears to Georgette and learn about this truly fantastic effort.
This is a very special opportunity, George. At Potter Watch, we like to highlight things that people are doing in their everyday lives inspired by the Harry Potter book series, and we've had many guests who've offered personal stories of how they're changing the world. We've also had some folks on who've talked about things going on in their communities that have been inspired by the series. But Lumos is perhaps the first and most international example of what we can do when we're inspired by good literature and in particular the Harry Potter series. So I'm very excited to have you join us.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute delight to be here.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, what can you tell our listeners about Lumos? We need to get the word out. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that your listeners know better than me and better than many others that Lumos is the light-giving spell in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
10 years ago, in fact, actually it's longer, about 12 years ago, Jo Rowling saw an image on the front cover of a newspaper that changed her life and went on to change the lives of, in the end, it will be millions of children.
Yeah.
This was a picture of a child sitting in a cage. And that was a shocking image to see, especially when Jo found out that the child was a little boy with disabilities in a caged bed in an institution in the Czech Republic.
Wow.
Czech Republic, a very, very developed European country, and so shocking to imagine why on earth in the 21st century
right.
we would be keeping children in cages.
Right.
So Jo started to find out what she could do about this, and she founded an organisation. And I was asked to come and to help develop the programs of that organisation, because since 1993 I've been working to get children out of institutions and back to their families, and so I was really lucky that Jo decided she wanted to do something about this. And when we tried to think of a name for the organisation, Jo suggested Lumos, and it's a perfect name because, in Jo's own words, what we do at Lumos is we bring light to reveal the hidden children who live in the darkest of places. And once we reveal those children, then we get people to care about this problem, and then we sort it out. And so what most people probably don't know is that there are 8 million children at least living in so-called orphanages and institutions around the world. But 80% of those children have at least one living parent. They're not orphans.
Yes.
They're there because of poverty or because they have disabilities and there's no inclusive education in their communities. They're there because they're from discriminated communities. And they're there because there simply is not enough effort and thought put into how we can keep children in families. And so that's why Lumos started, and we work across the world to end this practice of taking children from their families and raising them in institutions that are seriously harmful to their health and development. And we know that this is a solvable problem, and by 2050 we're going to make sure there will be no more children in institutions anywhere in the world, and every single child will be living in a family that makes it possible for them to be loved and safe and protected and happy, included in their community, and give them the opportunity to develop to their full potential.
Awesome. Yeah, I was very excited and glad to read on the Lumos website this fact that these children aren't really orphanages, many of them, that there are families there, and perhaps the solution is bringing them together and, you know, connecting, keeping people connected. It's not that there aren't resources for the children, which was a new thought for me. You know, when I hear of orphanages and institutions, you think they're children without the possibility for connection, and that's a very different problem than having the potential there and stepping in to reconnect people.
That's absolutely right. And we find in the work that we've done in many countries that if we put in place support in the community, we can prevent children from being separated from their families. Nearly all children can stay with their families. Sometimes there are cases where children are actually orphans or literally have nobody, but quite often then the extended family can care for them. And of course there are exceptional circumstances where the families are so abusive that it's not safe, it's not a safe environment for the children. But those are a tiny minority of cases, and in those cases it is possible to set up really good local foster care families or local adoptive families. And there are also a very small number of children who have extremely complex needs, who we find struggle to be in a family. And so for them, a very, very small, high quality residential facility, but here we're talking about a house in the community that has 4 or 6 children, and really wonderful, caring, loving, qualified staff who look after those children. And we often find that when those children have had a period of time in a small home like this, then they might be ready to move on to a family. So it's about setting up a range of approaches that work for different children according to their needs. But we also find in many circumstances that if we help the government and the local government to put in place some basic support in the community, the numbers of children coming into orphanages reduces dramatically.
I imagine, yeah.
So for example, community-based healthcare, making sure that there are health visitors and doctors who can reach out to the community to intervene if there is a problem, but also inclusive education is a big one. So children with disabilities need to be educated in our community schools alongside all other children, and if you set up a system like that, a lot of children don't need to go into institutions.
So that's a type of segregation in and of itself, even when you're within the community, but because of how you're labeled, you're not able to participate in the kinds of relationships that the other children do.
That's absolutely right, and very often governments have set up these segregated residential special schools believing they're doing the right thing because they believe this child needs an education, they're different from other children, so they need a special form of education, which means it has to be in a different place. And of course, you know, there's still a lot of stigma attached to disability in many countries in the world, and this is something that takes time to shift. But if you look at a country like Moldova where we work, in 5 years we've managed to help the government put in place an inclusive education system across the country, and now 40% of schools in that country are inclusive, and now the number of children with disabilities being educated in school has trebled, and most of the children are now out of institutions and back in their families. So it's possible to make those big changes happen in society.
In 5 years, you know, many communities are still trying to build the relationships, to have the conversations, to even take step one. You know, is there anything that floats to mind in terms of what Lumos has been able to do to get moving with other countries, to establish those relationships and get people on board? That just sounds remarkable.
I think what works, or what we have seen works, is working on many different levels at the same time. So we help national government to put in place legislation, to put in place a national action plan to change their system. That involves a lot of education and a lot of awareness raising for governmental employees who can't envisage
Sure.
a system without institutions,
Yes.
so we have to help them to see what's possible.
Sure.
But then we also work at the local level and we identify local authorities who become the demonstration regions, so more open-minded
Okay.
thinking people.
Like a pilot
That's
program.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then we accompany them every step of the way.
Nice.
And that includes community awareness raising meetings, training of teachers, training of doctors, of social workers, etc., empowering children to have a voice and for them to be able to speak out and say what they want, what they need, empowering parents of children with disabilities to do the same. And so we find that if you work intensively on every level, then you can make the change happen relatively quickly.
Sure.
5 years is still a long time in the life of a child,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
in sort of seismic change in the way a country looks after children,
Yes,
it's not a long
it's-
time at all.
yeah.
And the last piece that we do, which is really important, is very individualised work with the children in the institutions. So helping them get ready to move to, whether it's that they're going back to their family or they're going
Yes.
into a foster family or whatever, the longer the child has been in the institution, the harder that move
Sure.
is.
Yes.
And even if a family loves them and wants them, a relationship may have broken down over years,
Yes.
so you have to rebuild that.
Yeah.
Plus which we have children with very good institutionalisation. And what I mean by that is that institutionalisation itself seriously harms child health and development. There's lots of research out there, 80 years of research that shows this, and it is shocking for a lot of people. People find it hard to believe this,
Sure.
but it is shocking. And actually, it harms the development of the brain. And because of that, we see all sorts of behaviours in children that can be really difficult to understand. So we'll see children rocking back and forth, making strange hand flapping movements, hitting themselves in the face,
Yes.
smacking their heads against walls, self-harming. And sometimes as a response to that, if you're a member of staff looking after 20 or 30 children, the only way you feel able to protect that child who is self-harming is to tie them up. So
Yeah,
we've worked with
restrain
children who've been literally tied up for years and years on end, and they are so damaged by that experience that sometimes when you untie the child the first time, they scream in terror,
Yes.
and they have to be tied up again. You
Yeah.
cannot just automatically
Yes. They've
untie.
adjusted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't automatically untie a child who's been tied for years
Right.
and think that somehow we can just rescue them and get them home.
Right.
And we know, and we've come across many, many children who have never been out of their bed
Yes.
or the room, never mind
Yes.
the building,
Yeah.
since they entered it when they were a baby. And so the first time you talk about bringing them out of the building, terrified of the feeling of the wind on
Sure.
their face, terrified
Sure.
of grass, of trees, of leaves. And so there's so much that has to be done to do this really gradually and to get them ready to move from the institution. It's about helping the children to learn to be free
Sure.
after being incarcerated for so long. So this is very detailed and specialised work, and it's working on every level,
Yeah.
with the individual child, the family, the institution, the community, national government, the people who are giving money to countries. We work with all of them to make this shift happen.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like there's some what you could call convalescent symptoms when that as I like to say, love comes to town. The brain reacts when it's adjusted to the lack of love and lack of attention and ability to experience the senses and be free. And so it sounds like educating the government and folks around the children about that process is important. I imagine that otherwise those behaviors could be seen as signs of pathology or signs of the necessity to keep them tied up forever, or to say they're not able to be reached, when in fact that's the sign that things are moving forward. But it might get bumpier before it really takes hold.
That's exactly right, and part of the problem is that if you don't understand the impact of institutionalisation on children, first time you walk into a place like this, and if you see a room where there is a bench along every wall and there are 20 kids on each bench rocking back and forth, staring into space, moaning, flapping their hands, scratching themselves, you think, oh, there's something seriously wrong with these children. And therefore, of course, that's why they're here, rather than understanding that this has happened to them because they're here and because they don't have that love of a family. And I think this is something that again, because most of us have a family, have grown up in a family, and families aren't perfect, and most of us will have some complaints about our families, but we cannot imagine, until you've seen the absence of parenting, you can't imagine how important it is. Right. It's like oxygen. Yeah. You only notice how vital it is when it's taken away from you. Yeah. But we see this all the time, and we see the way children do respond. And I think for me, one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen, and I've seen it many times, but the first time it really was incredible. I've seen a lot of disabled children in institutions who were dying of starvation. And part of why they were dying is because they would be children with eating and drinking difficulties who need quite a lot of time and assistance in order to eat a meal. Often again, you'll be one staff member who's looking after 20 kids, 30 kids, 40 kids, and has to feed them all. And they're given a very strict regimen and told, you need to feed 20 kids in half an hour. Well, that means that on average, each child is getting 1 minute 20 seconds to eat their food, and they're being force-fed, and they're not getting enough nutrition, and they're dying of starvation. So what I saw is that these children started to react and respond in an extraordinary way once they were held and loved and started to be stimulated and to develop a relationship, because nutrition is not just about how much food we get down a child's gullet. What I saw with children who had been completely passive when being fed, the minute that you start to love them and show them affection and interact with them, they start to form a relationship with you. They want to eat. Yes. And they want to eat to please you. Sure. And so what I found with these kids who were dying of starvation is that the first thing they needed was to be given a reason to live. Yeah. And that is love. And that's what family is, and that's what it does. And without that, all of us would waste away.
I'm reminded of, in the United States, one of the tests of the strength of the country is housing starts. You know, how many new homes have been built. And not being particularly handy myself with building homes or remodeling a room, I've often, walked into a room, whether looking for a home to buy, or at a friend's home, and there are people out there who can walk into a disheveled home, a fixer-upper, and picture exactly, what it could look like with some loving care. And of course, there are lots of television shows, nowadays of people get very excited about, because you see these visionary people who walk into a home, and they can see what can happen. Because they have the tools and the understanding, and they can see things that I can't. When I walk in and just feel completely overwhelmed, and I can see that Lumos is making something like building loving communities a sign of strength, in the world, not just a country, and I think this kind of vision is really deeply needed, because walking into these places you're describing is overwhelming to many of us, and we just can't see how beautiful it could be. But I see that you can, and I'm very excited to get the word out about this, because it's just wonderful.
Well, it's really important to get the word out, and it's really important for a number of reasons. The first one is that when people hear the word orphanage, they don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And I don't want to criticise all people who are working in or who set up orphanages, because in many cases they're doing this with the best of intentions. But there is 80 years of research evidence that proves that children simply cannot thrive outside a family environment, and that no matter how hard you try, you cannot make an orphanage work well enough for a child. But I've also seen many orphanages where children are being neglected, abused, dying of starvation, they're being trafficked. And that is because of underinvestment, and sometimes it's because people have seen that they can make money out of children. But essentially, all children in orphanages are being harmed, no matter how hard some people are trying to make that better. And the reality is, as you've said, most people would walk into an orphanage, and if it has poor conditions and if they can see children in a terrible state, they'll think, oh, right, I need to fix the roof and I need to paint the walls and I need to bring in some nicer blankets and I need to bring in some toys, and they think that somehow improving that physical environment will change what the child, what's happening for the child. And in fact, that's not what works. It's getting the child out of that environment and into the family. That's what works. And although it feels overwhelming, and although it is 8 million, there are many countries in the world that used to have huge numbers of children in orphanages, like the United States. Only a century ago, there were 100,000 children living in orphanages in this country in terrible conditions. More than 80% were not orphans, they had living parents. They were there because their parents were poor. So the situation that we see in many developing countries was the same here 100 years ago, and that changed completely. So when we know it can change in a country like the United States or in the United Kingdom or other European countries, we know that it can change globally, and we know we can end this particular harm of children by 2050.
Well, George, thank you so much for being on the show and for teaching the world about Lumos and its work, and I'm sure you'll continue to do amazing things, and will inspire others to join in any way they can. I think there's a lot of work here you've outlined briefly, but I can see that there are many things we could be doing in our local communities to support such efforts. You know, whether Lumos comes to town or not, we can take that spirit and those ideas and jump in and make a difference.
Well, thank you so much, and there are a number of key things that people can do. Obviously, we always do need funds to help. So even if you can give $5, that will make a difference to it. But not everybody can give $5. But what you can do is spread the word. You probably know people who are supporting an orphanage somewhere in the world. Tell them that it's not necessarily the right thing to do. Help them to understand that it's better to support community-based services in that country to help children stay at home with their families. You might know young people who want to volunteer in an orphanage. Tell them that actually that's a harmful thing to do. Do your research first. And in fact, many orphanages are being built just to attract volunteers and the money that they bring. And children are being brought in from families, children who are perfectly happy in their families, in order to get that orphanage going, in order to bring volunteers. Spread the word and just tell everybody you possibly can that children need families, not orphanages.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Oh yeah, frustrations of a young man. Oh yeah, frustrations of a young man. Oh yeah, frustrations of a young man. Oh yeah, frustrations of a young man.
In this installment of Voldemort's Corner, I'd like to offer support to the mission of Lumos by highlighting one of my favorite volumes on the experience-dependent growth of the brain. Alan Shore's now classic text in the worlds of child development, psychiatry, and neuroscience is titled Affect Dysregulation and Disorders of the Self, published by Norton Books in 2003. Dr. Shore gives voice to the fact that there are periods before and after birth in which the brain is taking shape in response to an infant's experiences with other people. While this is a highly technical book, I want you to know that it exists, and it is full of references to rigorous research studies that reveal how our capacity for empathy, focusing attention, and coping with stress is determined in large part by our interactions with others, while our brain is developing outside of the womb. Dr. Shore expertly describes how negative social interactions, or relational traumas, contribute to mental health problems. It's clear in his work that we need to have people in our midst as we grow that help us maximize positive feelings and accept and cope with negative feelings. As he puts it, the caregiver-infant pair is a regulatory system. When we mirror an infant's excitement and they respond with more excitement, it fosters more robust neural growth in important areas of the brain. The same is true when they are older and we help them cope with negative feelings and set limits for them to react to. This is just too much work for an orphanage to do with the quality that helps children learn to seek out activities that promote positive feelings while tolerating negative feelings. Another way to think about the important work of organizations such as Lumos is to see how they are putting an end to institutionalization by creating opportunities for empathy, attention, and coping with stress on the micro and macro levels. They are shining light and illuminating the love already present right where we are.
It's easy to see that you believe that you got it, that all your pieces will fall into place. But the truth is that your illusions of grandeur are just illusional musings at best. But it still takes all of the strength in my body to muster all of the moxie I got. 'Cause I'm needed to act upon this advantage so I can manage to finish you off. I'll be out there for the greater good, doing my best just like he knew I would. She'll be my fire, be my burning flame. You send shivers down my spine, but if she believes, I know I'll be alright. Necessity is the mother of invention, but even clever suggestions would do. So I sit down and try to plan or imagine, decide on a course of action to take. But the truth is, I'm feeling lost, it's confusing when you don't know what you're doing at all. But believe me, no matter what kind of horrors will travel to every corner, I will. Just watch me. I'll be out there for the greater good, doing my best just like he knew I would. She'll be my fire, be my burning flame. You send shivers down my spine, but if she believes, I know I'll be alright. Broken, bruised, or battered, I'll keep coming like a freight train. I'm on a mission to deny your opposition, so get ready for the hurricane. I'll be out there for the greater good, doing my best just like he knew I would. She'll be my fire, be my burning flame. You send shivers down my spine. I'll be out there for the greater good, doing my best just like he knew I would. She'll be my fire, be my burning flame. You send shivers down my spine, but if she believes, I know I'll be alright. I know I'll be alright. I know I'll be alright. I know I'll be alright.
Would you like to help end the institutionalization of children? You can. Go to wearelumos.org and make a donation to help George and her team keep up the effort. If you have a project you would like to tell the world about, be a special guest on Potter Watch. No effort is too small, no topic is too big to share with your wizarding friends. Just send us an email at potterwatchmail@gmail.com. Potter Watch is made by fans for fans and produced in Ithaca, New York by Tony Cacciaccia. Thanks for listening.
Oh, and by the way, that was Oliver Boyd and the Remember-Alls with a great wizard rock tune, Necessity.